Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be. Today's lesson is all about Hyper-V, and this will serve as an introduction to Hyper-V. My name is Jacob Graham. I'm the creator of this channel, Unix Soldier. Let's get started. So Hyper-V, as you may or may not know, is a hypervisor. And what a hypervisor is not what I'm going to cover, but I'm going to tell you the difference between a Type 1 hypervisor and a Type 2 hypervisor. Again, if you don't know that, you can substitute the word hypervisor for Hyper-V client. So the difference between a Type 1 Hyper-V client and a Type 2 would be the fact that, first of all, Hyper-V against something like VirtualBox, you see, Oracle VirtualBox is a Type 2. Whereas everything on the VMs is getting emulated through the guest OS, or the parent OS. So the guest OS has to go through the parent OS and then to the hardware. Whereas if you do a Type 1 hypervisor, everything goes directly to the hardware. And when you use a Type 1, it actually goes and installs. Like when you install Hyper-V, whether you're installing it on your client, you're installing it on your server, you're installing it on a VM, it doesn't matter. It's going to put a parent partition underneath everything. So that's the difference between the two hypervisor technologies. Now here we have Hyper-V Manager. I have it installed on a server called Yoda. And here's Chandra, because you can also run Hyper-V from your workstation. So, yeah. Anyway. So, we have a template here that I've created. And this is basically a sysprepped image that I've just finished creating of 2012. And I wanted to show you a couple things. So you can add different things. So as soon as you open the settings pane, you're going to be brought to add hardware. You can add a SCSI controller. Adapter is called a synthetic adapter. And then basically that's a regular adapter. They call them synthetic. And then there's also legacy network adapters. Sometimes legacy network adapters are called emulated adapters. And these are really good like, let's say if you can't install integration services into your OS, like let's say you're using Arch Linux or Gen 2 or something like that, and there's no integration services for that version of Linux or that version of Windows or whatever, you might want to go with a legacy network adapter. The other big reason to use a legacy network adapter is you can do a PXE boot or a network boot with them. So the other thing you can do is called a fiber channel network adapter. And notice how it's spelled different, fiber. This is to distinguish itself from fiber optics. So a fiber channel adapter has to do with SAN capability. There's actually a SAN manager. You can go and do your own SAN thing here, which I actually haven't done a whole lot of. I've just kind of learned it, but I haven't seen a real need to create a SAN yet. So I won't be actually, as a result, covering that as much. So we go back into settings. We've covered pretty much everything. Oh, there's also the remote FX video adapter. Now, this is used if you wanted to use, let's say, a GTX 560 or, geez, I'm way out of it now. That's just the video card I have. I don't know what all the latest video cards are, but if you had like a really nice Titan video card or something like that, you could throw it in here, and you could actually run DirectX and different, higher-end gaming protocols on your computer, or sorry, on your VM, like you would on a computer, and take advantage of remote FX 3D. Okay? So next we're going to go into the BIOS. Okay? And this is basically the boot order. Okay? You tell it which order you want it to boot the different media. So you might want to boot off a floppy. I don't know why you would in this day and age. The only thing floppies are really good for is RAID drivers on old 2003 servers. And occasionally, yeah, I have seen a few reasons for them. I had a client who wanted me to back up all his floppy drives, but that's off topic. So you can change the boot order here, and you can also click this numlock button. What that'll do is it'll actually make it so numlock turns on. At least that's what I think it does. I've never actually done it, but I'd bet money on it. That's what it is. It's when you boot your computer, numlock will be on. Some people really like that feature. It's also available in most BIOSes, so they put it in here. So memory. Now, memory is a big thing in Hyper-V now because they've enabled this thing called dynamic memory. And you can actually set a startup amount or a starting amount of RAM, because sometimes certain OSs need a certain amount of RAM to install the OS or to run. So you give it the beginning startup RAM, and then you'd go into dynamic RAM and make a startup minimum and a startup maximum. And that would allow you to have a better ability to control how much RAM you're using, and also keep better track. Because, you know, if you don't need extra RAM, you know, your system might be set for 3 gigs and it's only going to use 1 gig for most of the time. This will account for that. You can also set a memory buffer, and it actually says right here, specify the percentage of memory that Hyper-V should try to reserve as a buffer. Hyper-V uses the percentage in current demand for memory to determine an amount of memory for the buffer. So as you can see, for this VM, I have it at 20%. And then there's memory weight. And again, it says it right here. Specify how to prioritize the availability of memory for this virtual machine compared to the other virtual machines on this computer. And it also says right down here, just a little note, specifying a lower setting for this virtual machine might prevent it from starting when other virtual machines are running and available memory is running low. And that makes sense, right? So basically what they're saying here is if your other VMs are on and are using lots of memory and you don't set the priority or the memory weight correct, certain VMs might not start because the others are taking more precedence over the available memory. So that's basically what this is. It's priority of what VM gets more memory, okay? Next we have processors. This is fairly straightforward. Well, the first tab is anyway. Numa and compatibility aren't. We'll get into those in a sec. So the number of virtual processors running. As you can see, this is an 8-core, well, actually, maybe you can't see. You can see that the computer I'm using is a 6-core, but the actual server is an 8-core. And yeah, I'm just using desktop software because servers are expensive. Actually, it was just given a really nice quad-core, has 4 CPUs, and each is a dual-core Xeon at 3 gigahertz. I was just given this 6 server with like 3 quad NICs. But right now, I'm still using desktops for servers. And you can actually set how many processors you want this guy to use. I have it set for 1, but you can actually bump it up to 2 or whatever you think is necessary for the amount of users or the amount of services or daemons that are going to run on this virtual machine or container, okay? Then there's also resource control, and this isn't the same thing as resource metering. Resource metering is a way that you can, and we'll explain that more later, but it's a way that you can track how much resources VMs are using. And resource control lets you control the amount of CPU cycles and percentage of the CPU is available to the allocated VM. Okay? Hope that's as clear as can be. Next, we have the Compatibility tab. Now, Compatibility tab is really kind of a neat feature if you're doing a live migration from one VM to another. So, compatibility allows you, when you're doing a live migration, let's say if the 2 CPUs are both, you can't do a live migration, by the way, as far as I know, from an AMD Opteron to an Intel Xeon processor. As far as I know, it just won't work. I've never done it because, you know, as much as I like AMD, I'm using all AMD for my own personal computers. Intel is the way to go with servers. It just is. So I've never actually used them. But I do know from experience, when you're going and doing a live migration from 2 CPUs that are not exactly the same CPU, you want to use this compatibility mode. What this compatibility mode is going to do, let's say if you were, most people learning this stuff probably aren't going to know the difference in CPUs. They're not going to know their Xeon. So I'm going to use Intel CPUs, like i5s and i7s, because that is going to make more sense. So if you had a 3550K, I think it is, versus a 3770K, and that's basically an i5 and an i7 processor, you could do that. You could migrate from one box to another. And this is actually important to know too if you're using Hyper-V on your own system, because whether you have a server or not, you can actually use Hyper-V on your computer. Depends though if your processor and motherboard supports virtualization technology, but that's another story. So if you select compatibility, what it'll do is it'll tell the 2 different VMs to talk on a dumbed down version of the language, the architecture, basically the machine language that the CPUs are understanding. So it'll talk on a dumbed down level so that the compatibility goes a bit smoother. So that's pretty cool. So if you're doing a live migration, it's very important to understand the compatibility tab. And these are all, compatibility and Numa are all found underneath processor compatibility, or processor tree. So the next thing I want to talk to you guys is about Numa. So I think Numa stands for, I apologize for not remembering this before making the video, but I'm pretty sure it stands for non-uniform memory access. So you have 2 processors and 1 Numa node in this case. So what you can actually do is you can actually have better resource management and better use of your memory when you use Numa. It actually lets you know right here in detail. Numa helps multiprocessors, pardon me, helps multiprocessor virtual machines scale better. With Numa, the virtual machine's processor and memory are grouped into nodes, and nodes can be grouped into sockets. Aligning the nodes and sockets of a virtual machine to the hardware topology helps improve the performance of Numa-aware workloads. Okay, so Numa's a new thing. It's pretty cool, and you guys should check it out if you guys haven't heard about it. And again, Numa and compatibility are found under the processor tab. This kind of stuff will be on your exam, okay guys? You guys need to know what's underneath every single tab. If you guys want to pass that exam, where they have multiple choice, and it's not just A, B, C, D, it's A, B, C, D, E, F, G. You know, the answers are hard. They'll say pick 2 or more, pick 3 or more. They're tough. And, you know, often what you think the answer is not. So my recommendation is don't do a whole bunch of brain dumping. You know, if you want to go that route, it's cool, but make sure you understand the questions. But the main thing I want to say is make sure you understand the material, okay? It's so important. So, IDE controller, I have obviously one set up for a DVD drive. That was basically the ISO that started it. SCSI controller, right? You can add one as well. You can remove one. Next, we're going to get into legacy network adapters. So, we recommend that you use legacy network adapters only if you want to perform a network-based installation of the guest operating system, or if integration services are not installed in the guest operating system. Communication through a legacy network adapter are slower than through a network adapter, or a synthetic adapter. And there is a limitation on how many you can use of each synthetic and legacy. And so you guys need to make sure you guys know this stuff for the exam too, because they will ask you. Another thing I want to point out is with legacy network adapter, that's when you could do the PIXI boot, or PIX boot, or a network boot as they were saying in the previous little snippet that I was reading to you guys. That's basically what that's for. And again, it was also talking about if the operating system, the guest operating system, or the child operating system in the VMware container does not support guest integration services, you're going to want to make sure, okay, that you go ahead and install a legacy network adapter despite the have said performance hit. So it is a performance hit, but it's what you want to do if you're doing that. Now you have what's called an advanced feature tab under legacy network adapters, but you get less options. As you can see, you do get port mirroring, you do get router guard, you do get Nic Teaming, and you can still do a lot of the same stuff, but it does have less stuff. What you're going to notice, first of all, if you stack legacy network adapter and network adapter right beside each other, you're going to notice that hardware acceleration is not available under the legacy network adapters. Only advanced features is. And I will point out, though, that the advanced features on each are exactly the same. Okay? So in hardware acceleration, they have different stuff like enable virtual machine queue. So the virtual machine bus basically connects from the virtual machine bus basically connects your network adapters to your virtual switch, and we'll show you the switches in a second. So that's a very important thing to know. Make sure you got to know your services, because if something goes wrong or something shuts down, the first thing you're going to check is, are the services running? Okay, if they're not, if they are and you're still having issues, let's restart them. So it's important to know the different, what VMQ is, and what, VMQ stands for virtual machine queue, right? And virtual machine queue requires a physical network adapter that supports this feature. So next we're going to get into, and I guess I should explain some of this stuff. So Nic Teaming, I forgot I haven't explained that at all. Nic Teaming is basically, another term for it is LACP, or Link Aggregation Control Protocol. And Nic Teaming is a way that you can actually connect, and it's been around for a while, but Microsoft's never had their own implementation of this before. Nic Teaming and link aggregation has always been around, or some people call it Nic bonding. It's been around forever. And sometimes certain network adapters support it, or certain hardware supported it, but now you can do it regardless with the Windows technology. So with Nic Teaming, there's switch independent and switch dependent mode. I'm not going to cover that in this lesson, but you're going to need to know that the difference for that in your exam. Basically, there's active and active standby, and you're going to want to know what those are as well. Active standby is when one Nic sits there and waits until the other one fails, and then it literally stands by waiting for action. And when one Nic fails, it fails over to the other one. But active is when two Nics talk at the same time to the switch. So you get an increased bandwidth if you do an active versus an active standby. Both, however, provide fault tolerance, both the active and the active standby. Okay? So there's COM1 and COM2. Basically, if you're doing any kind of programming or hooking up COM ports, I'm not too sure why you'd want to do that, but it is supported. Diskette drive, if you wanted to do a virtual floppy disk, you can do that. The name, basically just the name. You might want to put in some notes about this, like this is a sysprep. And if you don't know what sysprep is, I can tell you. If you message me, I'll tell you. This is a sysprepped image for future, and you want to sysprep these so it rips out the SIDs, or the SIDs. If obviously you wouldn't want to join one of these to the domain, so I guess the SID wouldn't matter. But it's going to rip out the product key, and it's going to rip out a bunch of different things like that. And what that's going to be able to do is it's going to also rip out the unique ID that the virtual machine, the hypervisor uses to talk to the VM. So what that'll allow you to do is you can make a template and then install as many VMs off of that as you need. This is a sysprepped image. Image for future 2012 installs. I'm a failed typer. Okay, as you can see. So that's basically what it is. We're going to apply that. Also, we go into the integration services. Now, this will be on your exam as well. Operating system shutdown, time synchronization, data exchange, heartbeat, and backup. Heartbeat, I'm going to cover that one first because this is April 27th, 2014. We just had our big Heartbleed thing came out, and basically it's the same kind of thing. It's like the term handshake can mean a lot of different things. Heartbeat is basically a way that the VM talks, the host talks to the guest VM and makes sure it's there, sends it a little signal to say, hey, are you there? Are you responding? Hello, I'm still moving. Don't freeze or sleep or whatever. Maybe sleep's a bad example because it actually doesn't do that. Your VMs will still sleep. But it keeps talking to it, making sure that it does not, that it's able to connect with it. So a heartbeat is a signal that's also used in SSL. And the Heartbleed, as I was mentioning, has nothing to do with this, but it reminded me of that, so I spoke of that first. Also, it can do a backup or a volume snapshot. So that's important to know. It does that before, I believe, the OS starts, or as it starts. Data exchange, if you want to be able to exchange data back and forth between the different VMs. It's time synchronization. This is basically to allow the NTP protocol to synchronize time between your VMs, especially if they're a domain environment. That would be important. And operating system shutdown. So these are all the different integration services. It's important to know basically a little bit about what each one does and to know where to find them. Okay? This is big on your exam. So the snapshot file location. Alright? This is the snapshot file location. Now, if I wanted to change this location, I would have to delete this location. That's also on the exam. Good thing to know that. The next thing I wanted to talk about is the smart paging file location. Same thing. Okay, this is the location. You can change it. There's also automatic start action and automatic stop action. So you can basically tell what's going to happen when the VM stops and starts. Now, I actually had someone tell me the other day that they wanted me to make sure that the VMs restarted at work. And I rebutted that, quite appropriately enough in my personal opinion, to say to him, well, who created them? And if you created them, you're supposed to set this up. So if you set this up, your VMs will properly reboot when your computer reboots. If you don't, they hibernate to the partition. So you want to make sure that you do that. You want to make sure that you set up this kind of stuff and that you really know what you're doing with this kind of stuff. Okay? So that includes all the different settings. The other kind of cool stuff you can do is Virtual Switch Manager. So you can have different types of switches. You can switch them at any time to internal, private, or external. An external switch is one that basically talks to everything, can talk to the outside world, can talk to all the other VMs. Internal only talks with the other VMs within the Hyper-V environment. It does not talk to the outside world. And a private network only talks to itself. It does not talk to anything else. Okay? You can also do some VLAN tagging, which can give you all sorts of crazy and awesome configuration ability with these 3 different types of switch technologies. Okay? So that's pretty much all I'm going to say about that. The other cool thing that you can do is the Virtual SAN Manager. Okay? A virtual fiber SAN groups physical HBA ports together. You can add a virtual fiber, or I always want to call it fiber channel adapter to a virtual machine and connect it to a virtual SAN. Okay? Lots and lots of cool stuff you can do. Now, if you're using the latest version of R2, 2012 R2, checkpoints are the new name for snapshots. As you can see, I don't have any snapshots. I also wanted to point out one thing. Make sure that if you want to prevent your VMs, when they get full of space, from rebooting, you want to create a fixed size Vhdx. If you do not, your VMs will go and they will freeze and pause if the VM runs out of space. And if they're dynamically allocated, you have no idea when that's really going to happen. Okay? So I really recommend that you guys check out Hyper-V. It's a very cool product. Thank you for watching this video.